This is section 133. We're going to determine if an equation is a function. So in this lesson, we're going to determine an equation if it's going to represent a function. Now, we should be able to just look at an equation and eventually be able to come up if it's going to be a function or not. Now, yes, we can put it into a graph. If you were to put that straight into Desmos, you should be able to look at the graph. You should be able to determine if it's going to be a function or not using the vertical line test. Now, we could also, with a little bit of analysis, determine if an equation is going to be in a function by looking for a key characteristic of our equation. Now, the first thing we have to do, though, to see if that characteristic exists is going to get y by itself. So I want to subtract x cubed on both sides. So I have y squared equals 1 minus x cubed. And then to cancel out the square, I square root both sides, and I'm going to get y equals plus or minus 1 minus x cubed. Now this is where the characteristic would manifest. If your equation has a plus or minus in it, it's not a function. And the reason being is if I plug in a value for x, let's just say 0, it's going to yield me a positive and negative version of that for a y. Well, if I picked 0 and I have a positive and a negative version of it, it's automatically going to fail the vertical line test. So the process is we solve for y, and then we want to see, is there a plus or minus, because that will determine if it's going to be a function or not. Let's look at this next equation. Now this one's going to be a little bit fancy. We have y's on both sides, and so for us to be able to combine that together, I'm going to add 3y to both sides. Now, I can't add them together because they're different terms. So what we have to do is we use a strategy called grouping. And we look at what's in common between those two values, and in this case it's y. So I can factor out the y. Now this is y times x squared plus 3. So the inverse of multiplication is going to be division. So I'm going to divide both sides by x squared plus 3. So I get y equals 1 over x squared plus 3. Now, my y is by itself. There's no plus or minus, so then this is a function. For this one right here, I could subtract x squared to both sides. So I get y cubed equals 1 minus x squared. Then I take the cube root to both sides. Because a cube cancels out with a cube root. Now, if you ever take an odd root, you don't get a plus or minus. The only time you get a plus or minus if there's an even root. So a square root, a fourth root, a sixth root. So because there is no plus or minus, yes, this is a function. For this one right here, subtract x squared, divide by a negative, square root both sides. Now that I took an even root, there is going to be a plus or minus. And so because there is a plus or minus, it is not a function. So what did we learn today? We learned how to determine if an equation represents a function analytically. So what is a key characteristic of an equation that does not represent a function? When you get y equals, or y is by itself, there's going to be a plus or minus on the other side. This does conclude our lesson. If there's any other questions, please leave them in the comments.